Welcome to the CEO.com show. My name is Clint Betts. Make sure you get the CEO.com app. We have an app. We have an Apple TV app. We have an Android app. We have an iOS app, which is different than the Apple TV one. That's the one on your phone. We got Roku, the little remote. It's very cool. We've got Amazon Fire TV. Basically, wherever you get apps, CEO.com is there. Make sure you download the CEO.com app. It's free. And what you get is exclusive content and other things. And the and other things thing is intentionally vague. I don't even know what it means. And other things. Download the CEO.com app today. You're not going to want to miss it. And I don't even know what that means. Anyway, let's move on. On today's show, I'm talking to Andrew Smith, who started Savory Fund and a whole bunch of other things. He's had 3 amazing tech exits for tech businesses, went into the restaurant business, has done incredibly well. You're going to love this conversation with Andrew. He's the founder, managing director, all these different things of Savory Fund. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. This is me and Andrew. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. The first question I got to ask you is, when did you know you were going to be an entrepreneur? At what point in your life did you come to that realization, like, I'm going to build companies, I'm going to create things, I'm going to be an entrepreneur?
I think the first time I thought about that was, my dad was a doctor. He was a dentist. He was a forensic dentist. He was on the crime scenes all the time and identifying people that had been killed or whatever. And I remember my father said,
your dad was a forensic dentist?
He was a forensic dentist. And I had a very traumatic childhood because he would always have like all these case things all over his office. And going in there was like it was like a Slayer video inside his office because there was pictures everywhere of people and it's just awful. I could not do it. But I remember one time my father said, you got to do something that you're going to be needed and relevant at all times. Doesn't matter what the market's doing, you'll be relevant. I'm like, okay. And he's like, you should be a doctor, a dentist. And I'm like, okay. And so I was thinking, I would probably do that. My dad's successful. I'll do the same thing. But as I kind of saw what he worked on and like people and looking in their mouths all day and stuff, I'm like, I just can't do this. I'm going to go into business, Dad. And he's just like, okay, business is up and down. It fluctuates a lot. You really should do something that's pretty stable. And I'm just like, nah, I'm going to do business. I can't do the medical thing. So I thought early on, I was like, I'm going to be a businessman. Didn't know what I wanted to do in business, but I think early on, I knew I was going to go into business.
And you started a tech company.
I started a tech company, and I don't think I was thinking I'm going to go do a tech company, but I remember living in Provo, Utah, and I was with some of my roommates. A couple of them were computer science engineers, and I was going into business finance. And one day, one of them came home from school, and he said, as we were watching TV, he's like, what do you think you could do with that Jaguar commercial if you could take that commercial and you could put it on the web? And mind you, this was 1998, 1999. I mean, the web was still fairly new.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of crazy too, Clint, because we can actually say in our lifetime, the internet started, right? Like none of our kids would even understand. We grew up with it. And I'm like, yeah, that would be really super dope. And he's like, I think I'm going to come up with that way of how to do that. So he built this codec and we had this technology. And sure as enough, the first person I called just to see if we could sell the technology was Jaguar. And we showed them how we had created this commercial and put it on the web. And they were our first customer. And I said, of course, we can send this out to the web and to your customers and everything else. And I called him and I said, dude, I just signed Jaguar. We've got to go ahead and build a tech. So we actually took the plane off the runway before we even had tech. And we started from there. We started building this cool streaming media technology. And that's what we did before, of course, the .com world blew up. But that was my first venture, was in streaming media within the tech world.
Well, how did that go? Like you said, like the .com bubble blew up, but how did that go for you?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough because we had all the things in the makings that you would want in a business. We had this really cool technology. We were a super hot company here locally, where we were in the fabric of the community. We were known. We had people coming wanting to work with us. We were making waves. We were, working with clients from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it was super fun. It was exciting. It was a lot of momentum. They had raised some private equity money. And of course, the 2001 bubble hit. And we were really going out to market or doing a big round when the market, of course, crashed. And when that crashed, it's a tough spot to be in when you're a CEO and you have employees and responsibilities and shareholders, and a market shifts like that much, like it did then. There were many nights I was looking at the ceiling going, I'm 25 years old, 24, I think at the time. What the hell do I know how to deal with a market crash, right? But the nice thing is we had some really good customers that didn't fire us. And so we kept on having those revenues through the dot-com bubble burst. And we ended up selling our company to one of our biggest competitors out of Huntington Beach, on the backside of the dot-com bubble. So it actually turned out better than it could have. And I think a lot of that was just resiliency and the tenacity we had as a team. But it was a painful journey, and one that I'll never forget. I mean, I still feel the pains you feel when you go through a market shift like that. It was tough.
Well, what leadership lessons did you learn during all of that? How did that transform like how you led the company?
Yeah, I think led that company and then led every company since then. And that is when, how you look at that circus guy that's like spinning the plates and they're all perfectly spinning and they got their toes up stuff. Like, how the hell is that working? But the plates start doing this sooner or later, and then they start dropping. And I always have thought with my executive teams too of businesses, I'm like, listen, the plates are all just spinning. They're killer. We're doing so good. And that's when I actually get the most nervous, because things don't just keep going that way forever. They just don't. And businesses that are growing like this right now, every single day, doesn't mean that they're going to do that forever. Some companies do. I mean, Apple has, for the longest time. But for the most part, I learned that you just have to be ready for the unknown, because the unknown most likely is going to happen sooner or later in your journey. You're going to hit a wall and you're going to have to reinvent yourself or pivot or come up with a new strategy to get around work around those issues. And I think that that's what I learned. And that, boy, it really matters to have a loyal team, people that are dedicated to the cause, dedicated to the company, because that's when you need them the most. And I feel like that's when I've galvanized the most with my teams, is when we've gone through the hardest times.
So when I was a young whippersnapper, an entrepreneur, right, a young kid, I owned a deli on Center Street in Provo, where
we talked about this. You were a restaurant guy.
I was a restaurant guy, and I was terrible at it, by the way. Your fund, which we'll talk about in a second, would have never invested in this deli. It was great. I was like naming sandwiches after. I was naming sandwiches after like Bob Dylan and the Beatles and stuff. Like I couldn't have cared less about it. I was just like, how do I, not work at a call center while I'm going to school, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was doing this, and then as soon as I could, I sold the thing and I got out. Most people get out of the restaurant business and go to tech. That's what I did. As soon as I could, I got out of it. You did the reverse. You started in tech and then went into the restaurant business. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's because I went from tech to tech to tech. So I sold my first company, didn't really enjoy being a public company. We were public. We, of course, were reporting to the street every quarter. And it was an experience for a young 25-year-old entrepreneur. It was a great experience. But after 3 reporting quarters, I decided to leave, started another company that was a financial software and sold it to one of my clients. And then started my next one, which was a construction software in the tech industry, but within the construction and finance industries. And it was fantastic. I loved it. Again, raised a nice large round from a San Francisco Bay private equity firm, had an unbelievable board of directors, had an unbelievable team, signing construction companies and developers across the nation, and actually in North America, up north, in Canada. And again, it was like everything was this, Clint. It was just incredible. It was like nothing can go wrong. All the plates are spinning again perfectly. And that damn 2007, 2008 cycle hit, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, I time things perfectly wrong. Like, so everybody thinks, oh, Andrew's so successful. I'm like, no, I actually time things perfectly wrong. So beware. But no, I was before the 2007-8 crash. We went through that, did the same thing as I did when in 2000, 2001. You have to, fire some people. You got to get down to the basics. We survived through that. And then ultimately that business sold as well. But when I looked back over my 10, 11 year career in tech, the things that I loved about tech still remain to this day. And that's why I personally have invested into tech, and I'm in funds that are in tech because I still have to scratch that itch. I mean, it doesn't go away. But the one thing that I was really intrigued with is I looked at different segments of the market that I was intrigued with were the ones that were less affected by the cyclicality of the markets. The ones that are more shock absorbent are the ones where whether the market is up or down, you still need and you still spend in that segment. And that was food and beverage. And I don't know if it was because I was from Chicago and, you know, it's more of an eat out town. And I was kind of, I guess, a foodie. People say, well, I'm a foodie, so I should go into food. Not necessarily. But I just thought, you know, it's a segment that as you look at it, it's just always growing. And it doesn't have these big shocks up and down, you know. And I'm like, boy, that would be sure nice if I didn't have to prepare for another gigantic shock. Now let's fast forward 12 years and think about a pandemic. But no one would have ever been able to tell me that it was going to have a shock like that. But for the most part, I was happy about it being more stable.
So what was the first restaurant you bought, and what was that process like? What was the decision-making process with that? How did you come about it?
Yeah, there's really three ways you enter the industry. You come up with an idea, you get your grandma's recipes, you get someone that knows anything about cooking, or maybe you come up with it. And then you set up shop. You go find a piece of real estate, you open it up, and you hope that your neighbors and their friends and their friends and their friends come. That's pretty risky, right? I mean, that's super risky, but that's the way that the whole fabric of the restaurant industry begins. The other way is to find someone that's done that and has done that repeated multiple times and then started to franchise. And you're like, well, I really like your restaurant or your concept or your cookie shop or whatever, and I want to franchise it. So then you can become a franchise. They provide you the menu and the recipes and the know-how and the training. And so then you're kind of a presto food and beverage person because of the franchise segment. The other one is that you can find a brand that has done the same thing that hasn't franchised, get involved with them, and then just be a corporate owned enterprise, partner with them, buy in, buy them out. So that's really the three ways you can get into the industry. When I was getting into the industry, I thought, I am good at finance and building businesses and raising capital and leading a team, but I don't know the damn first thing about restaurants, right?
Did you call your parents and you're like, hey, does grandma have any cool recipes that I could?
Secret recipes that would be amazing? and they said no. They said no, and we have none. So
it's like, we didn't eat well as kids. You don't want to do that.
Yeah. So, you know, the one thing that we looked at, my wife and I, is we thought, well, where do we like to go to eat? And before this, we were talking about one of your favorite restaurants in Provo. Mm-hmm. It was similar for us. We used to eat all the time at Nieder's Bakery and Cafe. It was a local bakery and cafe shop, had 4 units. They were building their 5th. And they had been around for like a decade. And I approached the founders and said, I'd love to be involved in Nieder's and build one up next to my house in Highland, Utah. And so they gave me the rights to do that. And we opened it up, and we were presto restaurant people like overnight. I mean, it took a while to build a building and it took a while to be taught, but we opened the business and we really learned the business by being in the business and doing it every day and being busy. I mean, it was busy, and it was right in the middle of a recession too. Clint, if you remember 2008, we were in a pretty horrific recession. And it was a real testament to the industry when, you know, the market was down, businesses were going out of business, the unemployment rate was crazy, if you can remember that. But the restaurant was absolutely packed, bustling. And I thought, I made the right choice this time because we're crushing it while everybody else is looking at figuring out how to lick their wounds and rebuild. And
yeah, so can I tell you something?
Yeah.
That's the time frame you're talking about is when I owned my deli. And as Nieder's was packed and super busy, the exact opposite's happening to me. I'm blasting like "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right" by Bob Dylan and just like sitting at the cash register, waiting for someone to come in. I'm like, I don't even know if I want people to come in here. Like, this would be crazy. I got to make a sandwich. Like, what's going on here? So I know, like, I remember looking at Nieder's. I was like, so this is everything that I could never do. Like, I can't even make like one of the sandwiches on Nieder's, let alone everything that they do, because they do all the cool like desserts, all that type of stuff. Yeah, Nieder's is unbelievable, but I distinctly remember I don't even know how I made it through that time period. Luckily, everything was super cheap back then. I could never do that again.
Yeah. No, Kneaders was one of those concepts that in our minds was the right place, right time. It was the right type of food too. People liked the comfort aspect of it. They were a freestanding building with a drive-through. It was before fast casual, restaurants really had come into the scene. That was a new terminology being thrown away. Actually, it was the new term, fast casual. Not as unhealthy as QSR fast food, but not a sit-down tableside experience with a waitress. Better quality ingredients, whatever. I'm like, this is going to go somewhere. And we were right. We struck it at the right time. We negotiated an agreement with the founders to grow out Kneaders everywhere west of the Mississippi. And the rest was history. And in about an 8-year period of time, we built 50 of those. So 50 Kneaders, 4,000 employees, $100 million business. It was an unbelievable run. And we learned a ton in the industry. One thing we learned is that franchising is great, but what we thought would be really unique is to actually buy into a brand, own the intellectual property with the founders, keep the founders with us, and then grow their concept to the point where it could be maybe franchise ready. And so we pivoted a little bit towards the end of that history. Oh, and as a side note, we own 72 Little Caesars too. So we did the Kneaders, and then we bought some Little Caesars and kept buying them. And so we had 122 restaurants across the country at the same time. But when we started deciding to get into brands where we could own the IP with the founders and grow them, more the way we thought would be the right way to grow those brands, we sold the Kneaders, sold the Caesars, and then really have been since then focused on being part owners with the founders of the intellectual property and building them to be scale ready so that they're national brands. So that's really what our focus is now.
And you've done that with a number of brands like R&R, Barbecue, Mobetta's. And by the way, the Little Caesars thing is sweet because as I was owning that deli where I was eating, I would never eat at my own deli. I would eat at Little Caesars. That's where I would
Little
eat.
Caesars,
it's like $5. It's the whole day.
Yeah, everybody.
One pizza, that's your whole day.
Yeah, if you haven't eaten Little Caesars pizza in your lifetime, you're not American in my mind. You only eat Little Caesars if you're American, especially if you have a bunch of boys at home. You bring them home, there are 30 pizzas, and you haven't broke the bank to get it. But yeah, it was a great brand. We learned a lot too with big, large franchise systems, what to do, what not to do. It was a great testing ground for us to understand that world.
Yeah, I love Little Caesars. And the company you're talking about that you did all this was called 4 Foods Group. And you've since pivoted again into launching a fund where you invest in restaurant. I mean, explain what the fund does and how and what made you decide like this is the way you're going to go.
Yeah, the history of 4 Foods Group really was Shauna, my wife. She started it. In fact, I was just getting out of the tech arena when Shauna had started the business. She was running the business with some of her sister-in-laws and sister. In about 6-7 months after we had started it, I joined her. So I was not the first employee of 4 Foods Group. I was actually latter. She hired me later. And so 4 Foods Group was really the basis and the foundation for Kneaders and for Little Caesars assets. And as we got into businesses like R&R Barbecue and Mobetta's and even Swig, we own Swig as well, we decided with the brands that we owned the intellectual property and we were building them to be scale ready and to be franchise ready in the future for maybe another owner, to dispose of the assets that we had in 4 Foods Group, to call it a day. It was an amazing tenure that we had with 4 Foods Group, unbelievable success story. And we just really had an enjoyable time with all of our partners in that business as well. So I pivoted by partnering with Mercado Partners. It's a local firm. Greg Warnock is the founder. He's kind of the Oracle original godfather of private equity VC here in Utah. He just is. And we've been friends for a long time. In fact, we raced semi-pro Porsche series together, and we just became really good friends. And we discussed him wanting to venture out and start new practices within Mercado under their umbrella. They were doing early stage investing into tech, into consumer products. So we have a lot of experience with that. And then they were doing growth investing into as well. And the thing that was staggering to Greg is just to see the history that we had with 4 Foods and thought, oh, you can actually make money in food and beverage. I'm like, you can make a lot of money in food and beverage. And the other thing is that there's actually profit in food and beverage from day one. Like you can open up stores and businesses and they cash flow every day. So he was mesmerized by that, and a pretty short conversation together at one of the tracks of one of our races. We shook hands and I became a Mercado Partners managing director. And we decided to partner up and start a practice for food and beverage called Savory.
I want to dig in on Savory Fund And what you're doing there right now, you're investing in restaurant concepts, investing in, as I understand it, like mostly fast casual currently, or what's the focus?
Yeah, the focus is the one that's the most probably safe within the market, which is fast casual. More money has been dumped into fast casual than fine dining or casual dining. But there is a resurgence of casual diners. Like if you think about even from COVID, coming out of COVID, going into a restaurant, we want experiences again. We want to sit down and have the sights and the sounds and the smells of a restaurant and not just ordering it through digital formats. So we actually see a resurgence of casual dining. So we are buying a couple tableside service, sit down casual dining establishments, but it's mostly fast casual and then the premium QSR, quick service restaurants as well.
Okay, this is great news because I'm going to pitch you an idea right now.
Pitch it to me. I want to hear it.
And I call it slow casual, like as slow as possible. Is my restaurant? I'm not kidding. It could be a 3-hour experience. Here's my idea for you. So I love Dutch oven cooking, like the cast iron cooking.
Oh, who doesn't like that?
Unbelievable, but it takes forever, right? And so here's my idea. It's like an outdoor restaurant where you go, right? You bring your family, you bring your date, whoever. And we make you Dutch oven food, like Dutch oven chicken or potatoes, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Because anything that's cooked in a Dutch oven is amazing. Maybe during the summer, you've got like the fireplace and you roast some marshmallows in the summer. Maybe in the winter, you're in like a trailer or something. I have no idea. But this is like slow, casual stuff, but high end. What do you think?
Okay, what do you charge for it? Because the way you make money is turning people out. Clint, you're gonna have to charge like $50 each of those cookies. Although we should try it. I mean, it's a moonshot. Let's give it a shot. It's a total moonshot.
Basically, I'm just asking if you want to go camping this weekend. That's
I'll go camping. It's easier than that. You can just say, "Do you want to go camping? We'll try this out."
I don't think it'll ever work. Man. But
no, I don't think that would work. You won't make money, and maybe you haven't learned that in your deli days, but you need to make money to keep going, just so you know.
Listen, I haven't learned that in my post-deli days, let alone my deli days. I don't know. I have no idea how all you guys make money. All right, let me ask you a few more things, just generally about like the restaurant and food business. What do you see as like the future of restaurants? Obviously, COVID-19 affected the industry in a major way. I can think of almost no industry that was affected as much as the restaurant industry. And you've got these big players, these tech players, like DoorDash or Grubhub and these types of folks who are, on the delivery side of thing, the actual like logistics of it. I wonder if they're good. They probably were great during COVID because they saved a lot of restaurants. Are they good long term? How are you thinking about the future of restaurants?
Yeah, yes and no. I think that it's an amazing question. I have to reverse for just a second and say this though, Clint. When I came from the tech arena and then I came into the food and beverage industry, I remember getting the first orders for our restaurant on a fax machine. And if you think about a fax machine, I mean, that was 2008. And tech was pretty advanced even in 2008. I mean, things were coming along pretty well and they were clicking at a fast pace in the tech arena. But we literally did not have any tech in the food and beverage industry. It was always lagging about 5 years from every other industry. It was just an archaic business and it was driving me nuts. But the nice thing is things started coming into the industry to make our lives a little easier logistically, delivery, online apps that you could order food online and then get it delivered for catering and other things. So it made it better and better. The thing that COVID did in the industry for food and beverage was it accelerated everything from maybe a 3 or 4 year additional timeline to get it really implemented into restaurants to 90 days. Like if you did not have it implemented, up, running in 90 days, which is why a lot of restaurants failed because they just could not pivot that fast. But those that did, it was an exceptional thing for this industry. Now your question is, well, what is the future of that? It saved a lot of the restaurants. It saved us. 50% of our sales were literally through those different platforms. But I think that the future of the industry now is around how do you get some of those sales back into your restaurant or under your control? It's so expensive and it hurts really the restaurant and the restaurateur and their staff to do the sales to make such a small margin. And I think there's a lot of disruption because of those third-party apps, but really has not been figured out as a long-term, there's no longevity to that business model. So I think that all of those brands, the Postmates, the Grubhubs, the Uber Eats, all of those are probably in jeopardy long-term because someone's going to come in and disrupt that. There's even some restaurants that are binding together right now, Clint, which is kind of cool. They're binding together to create their own co-op with their own software, with their own driver network at a much reduced price, and they're funding it in some major cities to say, we're done with these guys. They're taking all of our profits. And I just think that that's such the human entrepreneurial spirit of people saying, this doesn't work, so I'm going to make it better. And I think that's what we're going to see in the industry. The food and beverage industry, though, you say, what is the future of food and beverage? It's resilient. It's a $1 trillion TAM. It's the second largest next to medical. And so in my mind, it's not going anywhere and it's only growing. We're not becoming Betty Crocker overnight. I don't think you have. I don't know. I know I haven't. And as we move faster and our kids are getting busier, it's harder to make a meal at home with your family. I like to do it occasionally, but it's hard, right? So I think more eating out, more ordering food, it's going to be a way of life forever. And, you know, Clint, the other day when I saw you at that restaurant, I'm just going to point it out, and I saw you sitting there with your wife, I was so happy to see you in a restaurant sitting down with your wife. I almost walked in and just pulled a chair up and just sat next to you because I wanted to see you like in the person and not digitally, because we're human creatures. We're social creatures. We want to have the conversation and break bread over a table. And how are you going to replace that, Clint? No tech is going to replace human interaction, right? And where we get most human interaction is entertainment, going to a sports event, in a restaurant. It's not going to leave. And so people say, what are you going to do after this? And I'm like, this is what I'm going to do for the next 15 years of my career. There's always going to be a need for Savory. There's always going to be the new cool kid on the block. There's always going to be the new restaurant that people want to see scale. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to give a lot of those different brands life.
Yeah, it seems to me like the problem with kind of the fatal flaw, as you just pointed out, with like the DoorDash, Grubhub, Postmates model is it's about those companies. It's about like DoorDash, Grubhub, Postmates, and how do they increase their revenue? How do they pay the drivers? All of that type of stuff, which, you know, there's tons of horror stories even on that front, right?
Yeah, really.
Whereas like they didn't start with how do we help the restaurants? Someone who would start with that and have a marketplace, because you're not going to, as a consumer, download every restaurant's individual app. That's not going to happen. So having a marketplace makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You're not going to do that, but the marketplace makes a lot of sense. But starting with how do we make this great for the restaurants and building out from there, a company that does that, I think, would just do unbelievably well.
Yeah, and the thing that they don't realize is that the restaurants are their source of revenue, right? I mean, if all of your revenue was the company that you're charging, you'd almost think, how do I actually become a partner with these guys? Instead, the pitch is, well, for your deli, Clint, we're going to bring you incremental sales. And we say, okay, incremental, or are you just taking those sales, putting them through your app? They don't come into my restaurant now. So you're actually just taking my clients, giving them back to me, but stripping the revenue or the profits. That's not a win-win scenario. That's why I believe it will be disrupted long-term. And listen, I have good friends at DoorDash and I have good friends at Grubhub. You have to have them in your business, and it's a large portion of everybody's business model still. It's 20% or more. It's not as much as it was during COVID, but it's going to be a meaningful part of this industry for probably the foreseeable future. But someone needs to disrupt it, and I think we're starting to see the first parts of that.
Yeah, it's not going to be like how Google or Facebook disrupted the media industry or like the news industry. Like that, you know, who cares about that? And they had their own like problems, but the restaurant stuff and like actually making sure that these restaurants are successful. If you're not starting there, then this is only a stopgap solution that maybe
it's a stopgap right now. And and it's working, right? We're all ordering from them. We're all busy, but something else will come along. But the industry as a whole, the industry is more stable than it's ever been. The industry restaurants that are winning are making more money than they've ever made. So people thinking, oh, I feel so bad for the restaurants. It's actually probably one of the most profitable times for restaurants. Labor is tough. Commodities are tough right now. There's issues we're dealing with in the industry that we've never dealt with And I would say that most people would say I'd go back and deal with just the COVID effects than all of these effects today because of the tail of the COVID effects. But at the end of the day, this industry is here to stay. And the thing that people want more of is less of the same guys growing more and more of the new cool kids on the block growing into their neighborhoods to bring new flavors, new experiences. And that's exactly what Savory's for.
My final question for you is this. You mentioned Shauna, your wife, who actually started Four Foods Group. By the way, she's far more impressive than you are, as you know.
Way more impressive in every way.
We'll have Shauna on to talk, to get the
Just
real
erase
answers.
this one, bring her on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she lets you grow your hair out. Like there's a whole bunch of
he still hasn't cut it off. I mean, it's amazing.
Unbelievable. Yeah. But I want to ask you this in all seriousness. You have one of, at least from the outside looking in and me knowing you pretty well, you have one of the most successful marriages I've ever seen. How do you do that? Unbelievable.
We talk about it all the time because we just enjoy the hell out of working together. And I think it can work. There's a lot of marriages that start businesses and then sadly they end the marriage and the business, or the marriage ends and the business goes and you got to split it up. And I just look at that and thought, they probably were swimming in each other's swim lanes like this down the lane in the swimming pool. And for me and Shauna, this is my swim lane and her swim lane's right here. And a lot of times there's other people in between our swim lanes, so it's even further apart. But the amazing thing is that I respect her in her swim lane and she respects me in my swim lane. And we communicate a lot about our own respective swim lane. Meaning I would say, Shauna, what do you think about this? Is what I'm dealing with. What are your thoughts? And she gives me just her opinion. And then I take it along with everybody else's and I make the decisions in my swim lane, and then vice versa. When we both make mistakes, we don't say, well, I told you should have done this, whatever. It's always just very much so supportive. We're learning as we go. And I always say this, Clint, and I would say this to any couple out there, whether they're in business or not, but in business for sure, it's really, really, really good to like each other, and to stay in love and like each other makes business really easy. And I actually genuinely love and like my wife. She's the coolest chick I know. I want to be with her all the time. And so it makes it easier to not, have the friction. But I always just say, if it doesn't work out after a day and it's really frustrating, go make out, because it's always going to be better the next day. I promise. But the last thing I was going to say is that you have the kids in it too, and kids pull pressure on all of us, right? We're all busy. We're trying to conquer the world. You're trying to conquer the world. We're all pulled into this competition of trying to become great and build great businesses. And then you're like, well, how do you have work-life balance? And how do you make it so that the kids are taken care of and they feel like they're cared for and that you love them? And Shauna and I early on just said, you know what, we're just going to have life. And we're going to make sure that life works out. And when I say we just make it so that life works out, our kids' lives and our lives, we just make them work together by including them in everything we do. We let them know what we're working on, what our challenges are, how we're overcoming them. They tell us about theirs. We work together on overcoming theirs. It's a very open relationship with our family to make sure that if I take a call in the middle of a vacation, my boys are not like, oh, got to take a phone call again. I mean, you don't even care about me. No, they understand I'd have to take that call. And then after, they're like, how did it go? What happened? What was the decision made? Include your kids. They're more curious than you think. And that helps a lot make the marriage work too.
That's beautiful, my friend. And you've raised some incredible kids. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Andrew, come back on. We got to have Sean on as well, as I mentioned. I really appreciate talking to you as always. Congrats on everything, and I'm excited to see how the fund continues to be successful.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good run. We got 5 brands now, 2 more coming in a couple of weeks that will be announced, and we have more on the on the horizon. So it's gonna be really, really fun.
It's amazing. Thanks, my friend.
Take care, brother.